Access 2007 Advanced Forms. In this nugget, we're really going to focus on creating forms that our users can manipulate, can work with, and so they don't have to get into a number of different forms all at once. They can do it all from one. So first, we'll add a subform to a main form. We'll also create some tabbed actions. So on one tab, they can input data for some types of fields, and on another tab, they'll have access to a whole other range of fields from even a different form that's tied to a different base table. We're going to add controls like combo boxes and list boxes and some buttons, and throughout this whole experience, we'll be updating the properties because each one of these objects that I've mentioned here has its own properties and its own behavior. So we'll really get down into the details behind how these forms work. Let's launch Access. Well, it's actually launched, but let's open it up. I have the Zoo database, and there are a few forms that I've already created, but from scratch, we're going to create a food orders form. I'll just do this simply. So I'll select food orders, I'll go to the Create ribbon, and then I'll select Form. Now we have an easy to understand form. I don't like how these form fields go all the way over to the right. I'm going to move those over just a little bit because I think that takes up so much extra space. First I have to deselect everything. Then I can select that very first field, and when my pointer is in the right spot, I can resize all the fields at once. This is a nice new feature in Access 2007. All the fields are what are called stacked, or they're held together. So when I resize one field, they all move, which prevents me from making some silly design mistake. In this scenario, if I have a user, and I'll show you the data in Form View, if I have a user that's inputting an order for the vendor Big Bug Foods, I want them to also be able to verify that it's the proper address for our vendor Big Bug Foods. Or what if they want to make a change? Or maybe they'd like to see the phone number and give that vendor a call. Wouldn't it be nice for them to have all that information in one form? That's where a subform comes in. So to create a subform, you must be in Design View. Another way to get to Design View is down here. So I'll click that Design View button and scroll down. I need some space for my new subform, so I'll move my form footer down a little bit. If this were a nugget to do with really good form design, I'd probably rearrange these form fields and move some over here, but that is in another nugget called form design. I need the subform tool. That's on the design ribbon here towards the bottom. Subform. It's also called subreport. You can do this in reports and it works the exact same way. I'll simply click and it will size it to the appropriate size, and I can always make adjustments later. Now what do I want to do? Do I want to use a table or a query or a form I've already created? I'll use a form called vendors that I've already created, but this brings up a very good idea. Before you create the main form, you should have an idea of what your subforms would look like and create those subforms first so that they'll work well in that main form. I'll click Next. I want to map my subform to my main form because when I'm on the Big Bug Food order, I want to see the Big Bug Food information, not the tropical nutrients. So I'll map this by clicking the down arrow and selecting Vendor. And then in my subform, it's Vendor ID. These are related fields. So if I went into my Table Relationships view, I'd see that these two tables are related by this field. That's another good reason why you set up your tables first, make them make sense, set up your relationships, and then you get in and start making the other peripheral objects. I'll click Next. What would I like to call my subform? I think Vendors is appropriate, so I'll choose Finish. Here it's resized this form, and it's kind of large, and if I scroll down, I can see that I have these fields. Let's check it out. I'll go ahead and go back into Form View. Here is my order information, and here's my vendor information. And I can definitely make changes here. I can change this, maybe Butterfly Road. They upgraded, they moved on, Butterfly Road, and I see my vendor's label. And I could also make a change, maybe this is actually the Insectorium. Now it updates, and the Insectorium's information. So you can see that they are tied together, and any change I make to these fields and these forms, of course, are going to go back to the base tables, food orders, and vendors. I'm really not so happy, though, with seeing this record and this record selector bar and some other items on this vendor subform. I'm first going to save this form called food orders as food orders, and then I'm going to close it and open up my vendors form. Sometimes Access will squeak at you if you have more than one form open at the same time. I'm in Form View. I'll go into Design View, and I want to adjust some of the properties of the form. So I make sure I have the form selected by clicking this little rectangle up here. It's not really a button. If I click on the properties sheet and move it into view, you'll see I have the form selected. I could also go here and just select a specific field, or click here and just select a specific label. This is where I clicked before. I kind of like it, but you can do this really however you'd like to do this. So what I didn't like seeing was the record selectors. I'll choose no. I didn't really want to see the navigation buttons either. I'll choose no. There's some dividing lines that aren't visible. If I had scroll bars, I could choose to see scroll bars, yes or no. The control box is this X right here. Maybe once I have vendors open, I don't want to see that. But I'll leave that control box on for now. I'm going to close this property sheet. I'll save my changes and close my vendors form. And let's go back into food orders, and we should see a nice change here for vendors. We don't have the navigation controls for vendors anymore. Of course, we still do for food orders, and we still have the record selector for food orders, but we don't have it here for vendors. So as you can probably imagine, for food orders, I could get in there and remove this record selector and make some changes as well. Again, this isn't a nugget about good design. You always want to keep that in mind, but I could get into vendors again and more in depth into food orders and change the colors and the font and special effects and items like that. That is it for subforms. As you probably noticed, there wasn't really a lot of room there, so that's where tabs can be handy. I'm going to create a form in Design View and start from scratch. So I'll go to my Create ribbon and I'll choose Form Design. From here I just have an empty form with nothing on it. I'll first add the tabs. Here is the tab button, and I can click and drag and draw my tabs as large as I'd like. Now it probably makes more sense to you what I was talking about with tabs. I have 2 pages. What does that mean? Let's go into Form View and see that I can go back and forth from page 1 to page 2, and I can have different fields that I can make changes to on both of those tabs. That really saves us a lot of real estate space instead of doing it the other way. I'll go back into Design View because Design View is where most of my tools are located. This used to be called the Control Toolbox in earlier versions of Access, but now we have it as the Design ribbon in the Control area. I would like first, though, to add some fields, right? We need to have some data. So what fields will we work with here? I'll have my animal inventory information, so I'll double-click on Animal ID to throw it onto that tabbed area, and now I can select more than one field at once. I clicked on Animal Name. I'll press Shift on my keyboard, and I can select down to, how about Habitat ID? Now I can click and drag and drop these. I'll click Close, and I can rearrange them a little bit. Again, I'm not going to really concentrate too much on good design, but just so you know, your arrow buttons on your keyboard will just gently nudge items into place. Okay, there I have my animal ID information. If I go to page 2, it does have my animal ID information as well, because it's nice for an order entry person to be able to see, okay, well, I'm still talking about this animal ID. I might even want to put the animal name on that page. I'll go back to page 2 and add some more fields. I would like now to associate my zookeepers. So I can double-click on zookeepers. Oh, it overlapped. I do have to make a change. But please note this field list now has 2 tables. It's showing me the fields that I am working with on this form. I'll select these items and I can click and drag. I wanted to be able to see my underlying area and drop them. I'll close my field list, and now I can move my zookeeper ID down a little bit. It's not perfect. Let's take a look in Form View now. We have Animal ID 7, who is Nelson. He is overlapped here I'll make that change in just a moment. I don't have my species ID in here, so I don't know what he is, but I sure do see that Nelson likes to eat watermelon. If I go to page 2, I see that the zookeeper is Patterson Abigail. I might want to rearrange those, and I'm still working with animal ID number 7. Back into design view and page 1, and I'm going to see if I can move that label. If I click in the upper left hand corner, I can just move that label. Yes, I do not want that label. I'll hit delete and that will remove it. I would like to add the species. That would make sense, right? To be able to know what Nelson actually is. So instead of zookeeper ID, I don't want that either. I want animal name. So let's add a combo box. Here is the control. I'll click on it. I'm just going to put it over here in our workspace. And it launches a wizard. Do you want the combo box to look up values in a table or a query? Or do I want to type in the values that I want? I would recommend tying it to a table or query, but if you have a very, very solid reason for typing in the values that you want, then go for it. The point here is we want to have well-designed databases, so we should have tables that hold the data that we need, and those tables should be built first, designed well. If they're not, and when we're creating a form we realize that we have another field we need, we should go back into that base table and add that field then. I'll click Next, and what table should I provide this information from? I'll choose Animals and then Next. From here I have both a species ID and a species. I'll choose Next. I want to sort this by species because when someone's entering data, they're probably not going to remember what that species ID is, but the name of it would make sense. I'll choose Next. It's going to hide the species ID and just display the name. I'll choose Next. Do I want to remember the value for later use or store the value in a field? I'm going to choose to remember the value for later use because you may remember when I was adding fields I had the option of species lookup ID, which came from that base table, which was my best bet to go back and actually just add that field. But my point here is showing you that you can create a combo box on the fly in a form. I'll choose Next. I'll call it species and then finish. Here's my combo box with the label species. Back in form view, you'll see that I have the choice of all the different species that exist in my animals table. I'll go ahead and choose gray wolf. Nelson is a gray wolf who loves to eat watermelon. There's also something called a list box. Back in design view, on the design tab, right underneath the combo box tool is the list box. From here, I'll just click and let Access size it for me. Do I want the box to look up values in a table or query? I sure do. I'll choose Next. This is going to be the exact same thing as before. I'll just choose an animal table. Next, just for kicks and shortness, I'll choose species. Next, I will sort it ascending by species, so I could do descending if I wanted to really make things rough. I'll choose Next, and here is my list of species. I'll choose Next. I'll remember it for later use. I'll call it species list box and finish. My point here really is showing you the difference between the two. Back in form view, you can see a list box has a scroll bar where you can make a selection, whereas a combo box has that pull down menu. Really the difference is real estate space. How do you want your form to look? How do your users like to make selections? And how much room do you have for fields on that screen? Back into design view, I'd like to just keep this combo box here, so I'll move it a little bit out of the way. What if I'd like to see the last time a form has been updated? I can do that by adding a field that's unbound and is just going to display today's date automatically once the form is opened. So I'll go ahead and choose this button right here, which lets me add an unbound control. And I will call this date last updated, or date modified, which is more succinct. Date modified. From here I can go into properties and you'll see you have a data tab. I have the control source area. When I click that build button, it gives me the expression builder, and I can see some of the common functions that we have, some of the common expressions that we have as well. I'll go into functions, built-in functions, and we have date and time. I can double click on date here and it shows me what the function is for that. When I choose OK, Access loves to throw this property sheet out of the way. My control source now says equals, date, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. Now for further notice, now hopefully you might remember this. You might remember that from the table properties as well. I could have simply typed this into the control source or into that unbound text box right there on my form, but I wanted to show you that expression builder. I can close this. Note when I close my property sheet, I don't have to make changes. And if we had more real estate, I could just move this out of the way. I'm only opening and closing it so that you can see what's underneath it. Now this is updated, so I could have just typed it in right here. And I'm going to go into Form View, and it will show me today's date. Every single record has this. And every single record, by the way, is tied together. So when I go to my next record, this updates as well. Animal ID 6. Animal ID 6 is Harry. Harry's also a gray wolf. Look at that. Well, I guess all of them are gray wolves because I didn't tie it to that base table. So I should actually delete that species ID form field because it's bad. I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard. So date modified. Now I'm going to, off the screen here, double click on my clock, and I'm going to change my date to August 6th. I'm going to save my form. I'm just going to call it tabs. And let's go back into Form View, and it's updated to 8/6. So it really does use the date that your system time thinks it is. But is this a field that I want someone to be able to update and enter? I might not want somebody to change that and indicate that the date was modified 2 months ago when it was really modified today. Maybe someone's trying to cover their tracks. Let's get back into properties. Back to design view, the date modified properties. I could double click here to launch my properties as well. And this field is called Text 18. For programming purposes, that's not a really good name. I'll go to the All tab and show you at the top the name is Text 18. I could call this Date Modified. And I don't like to use spaces when I'm naming an actual field. And I see the control source here as well. Since I'm on the All tab, it's going to take all of the information from all these tabs and just display it all to me, which is efficient if you don't know what in the world you're looking for, but it's not efficient if you do know what tab you could directly go to because there'd be less scrolling. So I'm going to show you a couple things as we go through here. My goal is to choose that we can't edit this form. But as I scroll through here, you can take a look that everything on this form is held in the properties sheet as well, such as if there's underline, or what color the foreground is, or the line spacing. So I've been selecting controls and using formatting buttons on the ribbon, but I could certainly do it in here if I knew what the code or the syntax was, or the name was as well. All right, so my grid lines, my top margin, I've got all my margins. What's the reading order? Are my scroll bars aligned? Is there any validation rules or validation text? Is it enabled? Yes. Is it locked? I could lock it here, and now no one's going to be able to edit it. Let's check it out. Back into Form View. Now when I click on here, can you hear that? My computer's saying, when you try to type in another value, I absolutely will not accept it. Since it's locked, it might be one of those design pluses also if you maybe select it and give it a gray background or make it look like it's really not something that's going to be acceptable. There's also in Design View, when you go into the Design tab, the special effects, so I could choose to make it etched. And sometimes that indicates also it's not as obvious. So you could make some design changes to it so your users would not be tempted to fill it out because they would know, hey, this looks like it's not going to accept my click. I'm not even going to bother. Back into Design View, I'd like to make that say not page 1, but I would rather have that say animals. And I'd like for my other tab to say zookeepers. See how these properties really do work well? Sometimes you have to pay attention when you type though. What if my users would like to print this form or open up another form? We can add a button form control. I'll simply click and it's going to launch a command button wizard. I could choose record navigation. Look at that, find next, go to first record, go to last record. It's just like that navigation that comes with Access. But if you're being very controlling with your forms because your application dictates that, you can remove those record selectors from the properties and you could really control what the options are. In record operations here, you could also have an add new record button. So when you think of coding and application development and how much goes into creating basic applications, in Visual Basic, for example, Access really has a lot of these built-in features that you can take advantage of. Let's go into form operations. I could choose to open another form right from this form. I could also apply a form filter if I have some specifics regarding what exactly I'd like to view and I want it to be easy on my user to be able to choose what they'd like to filter, then I could choose that as well. I'm going to go ahead and just stick with open form, but notice there's report operations buttons as well. Next, what form would I like to have my command button open? Well, how about food orders? Another reason why it's a good idea to have a design in your head and start creating forms that are going to be used in conjunction with other forms. I'll choose next. Do I want to open the form and show all the records or just specific data? I'll choose next. Do I want to see text, open orders, open order form? Sometimes my typing has a little bit to be desired, or do I just want to see a little icon that is clear, is nice, but perhaps not so clear to my user? It's up to you and what your users are used to. I'll choose next. Give it a meaningful name. That Retic naming convention that I mentioned earlier says that you should give a descriptive name so that when you look at the code or the name of items, you know what it actually is. So BTN indicates that this is a button, and I can do open orders, and I'll choose finish. And this is open order form like I told it to. I'm going to save this form and go into form view. That was on the Zookeeper tab. Here's my button. When I click on that, it opens my food orders. How easy was that? So there's a little bit of planning that goes into play here when you're adding these various controls. The good news is they're very easy to use once you know they exist and where they're located. The bad news is it just takes some time for you to sit down and really determine what the goal of your database application is. Hopefully I've given you some ideas though, so that you can have some outstanding forms that really will accommodate your business environment. Let's review what this nugget was all about. This was considered advanced forms because we really advanced your knowledge of the controls. A subform allows you to embed a whole different form that's related to your main form. Creating a tabbed form really frees up some real estate for you. And again, your tabs can include many different controls and also fields from varying data sources. I've been saying controls a lot here in this outline, and yes, everything that you add to your form is considered a control of some type, and everything on your form has properties that you can adjust by just double-clicking on the object or using the Property Sheet button that exists on your ribbon. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.